Christopher Crystal with Financial Stockholm. Today is Monday, October 7th, and we've had a very busy weekend here in Sweden in terms of the press, and our government has released a budget today and also starting to present the fulfillment of promises or broken promises according to their campaign trail. We know that we're going to be spending more for NATO. There are also conditions put on us by the Turkish government saying that there are several groups of Swedes, or not Swedes, well, they are Swedish in many ways. They've been living here for a long period of time, but there are groups here that are Kurdish that are being considered terrorists by Turkey, and they have to be extradited to Turkey in order to meet our NATO demands. And so it looks like these people who have been living here for quite some time will now be extradited to Turkey and may wind up in prison or worse. So that's a little bit of an issue. And we also had discussion about electricity cost, some of the taxes that were promised to be lowered and have not been. We had our Swedish parliamentary debate, and we do get some relief on some of the things, but it's really, it doesn't look like a good start right now for the coalition. And we will not have a situation like England at this point where you would see a replacement of the government, but you do have a scenario where things are not necessarily being followed. Criminality will be punished more harshly. Money laundering, however, will not be stricter with the banks. So we may have some more banking fraud coming along. Situations like we saw with where you had Danske Bank and Swedbank, and getting fines and getting sanctions may continue. But there will be some loss of civil liberties for Swedish citizens regarding how the police are treating them in car stops. But overall, life is continuing here in Sweden. The schools will be in focus, and there is concern. There was some fraud discovered or unraveled with some of the donations for the school money and where that money was actually going. But then, like I said, life in Sweden is continuing. We continue to see high electricity prices. We had more shootings over the weekend. That made the news. We also had explosions. That didn't really make the news. Even though it was in the Northern Stockholm suburb in a town called Vallentuna, there was an apartment building that was blown up. But that didn't make the press. There are far more things to talk about, like Twitter, which is not in Sweden, but used by virtually every Swede. So that's more important. We had a number of house fires, and it's not clear if those were arson or because people are maybe not diligent in their handling of home heating with the fireplace or candles. And it's a time of year where we're using more electricity and more lighting. So it's not clear there. But we also had no announcement on the plans of policing, although we do see that the criminality will be better prosecuted according to the Sverigedemokraterna. And that was a key component to their campaign. So it's good that they're meeting on there. But I think most of the focus this weekend was for the COP27, which is going on in Egypt. And everybody was very excited about that. However, there was a little bit of a muted message because our eco warrior, Greta Thunberg, she came out last week and said she would not be attending, and she did not really see the point of it for her to attend, and felt that there should be a destruction of the capitalism and so forth. So no real change in the message. We continue to see that the war in Ukraine is continuing. The United States is now sending tanks through the Czech Republic. The United States is paying for those tanks, as is the government of Holland, and they're being sent from the Czech Republic and will be moving into the Ukraine as well. Some of the tanks are refurbished, but it's about 400 million in tanks, I believe, and $400 million, and that was paid for by the US and the Amsterdam government. And then we saw this morning, and this is overall, we're not looking at a very healthy European economy. We've had record high inflation, we've had increasing energy cost, and but on the energy security, the EU and the United States have announced a energy security, meaning that the US will ship more billion cubic meters of liquefied natural gas. There's going to be at least 15 billion more from the current level, and that level is already over 44 billion. And remember, US supplied about 4% of liquid natural gas to Europe. And then after the Nord Stream issues and the Ukraine issues, the US is stepping up and supplying more. You've heard comments from Macron saying that the US is charging too much, but the EU is now working hand in hand with the US on this, and the EU also, van der Leyen, she made a call to Zelenskis, Madam Zelenskis, to say that Europe is standing or sitting side by side with Ukraine throughout the rest of the war and will be their partner. And that at the same time, she called the Rishi Sunak, and I was happy to hear that he will be standing with them on ESG goals and targets. So the UK government, which is shutting down or possibly shutting down their Sizwell C nuclear reactor plant, is working with the EU on its ESG goals and climate commitment meetings. This is why we see tweets from the German ministry to the UN saying that he's very happy that he's working with the UN on their climate targets, and that they need to act fast. But at the same time, the German Chancellor Scholz got back from China and has approved the Hamburg purchase, or 25% stake purchase by COSCO, which is owned by the Chinese government. And while we also have European businesses offshoring from Europe to China and to India. And the key here is that, and why I've mentioned this, is that we are in the middle of an energy crisis in Europe. We're relying on intermittent powers, or power sources that will not be in place for years. You could make the same argument about nuclear as you make about batteries and solar and batteries and wind power. However, one is a reliable constant source, and one is an intermittent, not always available source. And so we're not doing grid upgrades, nor are we making power installations or power investments to solve the problem. So the next few years will be very tough, especially if European businesses are leaving the continent for places like India, where they're building power, both coal and nuclear. And they're leaving places for China, which is also building coal and nuclear, and then even shutting down their inefficient coal plants by 2030. So it would make sense that if we have a target of 2030 for something, that we would build nuclear power plants, because then we would have them up and running by 2030 if we had to start from scratch. But we have a number of them that we could get back online. So it makes it a little tough for the business case in Europe. It makes it a more attractive scenario where you're looking at areas like China and you're looking at India, because you have a reliable power source. And much of our burgeoning technologies, like in fintech or in pharmaceuticals or manufacturing, will not be able to produce here in Europe, because all of them that are leaving are heightening the high cost of, or highlighting the high cost of electricity, the rising inflation, and the unreliability of the power. So this would be something that if I was running the government, I would be getting on top of right away, because you need to have a growing economy to keep your voters happy. However, the Swedish press did focus on Twitter and was talking a lot about Elon Musk. And there's a lot of critical statements about it, saying, well, he's going to kill the business. But really, you already have this network in place. The main competitor would be TikTok. That would be the Chinese version. And the Russian version is self-contained in Russia. And so Twitter is one of the current global, which TikTok is competing dramatically with. However, if you have a blue check mark, you own the digital ID, and then you have all the information on the subscriber. And if the subscriber is paying for it, then you need less of the advertiser money. And then you're also able to do the same thing with the advertisers. And if you control the network and you control the message and the voice, you're controlling the consumer, you have a self-contained power system. All you need is the electrical power to run it. and you just keep building the algorithms. But also what we see is more focus on the US politics and what's going on there. And from this, I would say that for the Swedish politicians, they're failing to recognize what brought them to power was people were not happy with how the previous government was running things or had let things go. They had seen that in the United States, they had seen that in France, they had seen that in places like Italy, but they come out of the budget process and they don't really make any moves forward. So right now, we're not an unstable government and there are no votes yet on lack of confidence, but that may develop here in the near future. And there is a lot of focus on the US, especially for us. There's articles talking about the NATO membership and what the cost would be to Sweden without the United States backing the NATO venture into Ukraine. Because if you have the Republicans winning in both the House and the Senate, you'd likely have an impeachment scenario going for Biden. You know, there's enough states up for grab in the Senate that you could get to the 67 to impeach Biden. And then you would see further impeachment of probably Kamala Harris and the rest of the cabinet and so forth and so on. However, if you would have a Democrat control where they win the election and they stay in power, then you would likely see the ghost of Trump becomes an official ghost. And that's what the Democrat Party has focused a lot of their campaigning on, is the ghost of Trump presidency. And they would move forward with putting him in jail, and so he would never be able to run again. And then also solidifying many other things. But none of this bodes well right now for the business economy. You have statements coming out about the oil and gas. You know, oil, no drilling, gas supplying to Europe. But you don't have viable technology in the green tech space that's up and running. So it's not that this is bad technology, it's just not currently available to replace what you already have. And you know, if you look at Larry Summers, former Secretary of Treasury, and if you look at Bjorn Lomborg, I can go on and on with other economists, but if you don't have these in place and you've created this inflation where you have the expanded money pool and you don't have the power system in place to lift your economy out of poverty, then you will continue to have problems and you will have a declining business scenario. So right now I'm still very negative, but these are all my views and would welcome any comments. But that's it for Monday, and we'll wish you successful investing. Thank you very much.